It's after 9:30, so I think we will actually start the conference today. Good morning to everybody. My name is Fiona Deegan, and I'm Head of Enterprise with the Local Enterprise Office here in Kilkenny, part of Kilkenny County Council. And want to thank you all for joining us today and welcome you on behalf of our project partners, which are the local enterprise offices in Kilkenny, Carlow, Wexford, Waterford and Tipperary. Other project partners include Enterprise Ireland, who have provided the funding for our South East Green for Micro conference, and also Three County Energy Agency and Tipperary Energy Agency, who worked on the Green for Micro pilot programme on behalf of the local enterprise offices. I'd also like to welcome our panel of speakers for this morning. So we have a fantastic lineup for you here today, and I hope you'll enjoy the conference. Our keynote speaker, Duncan Stewart, you're very welcome, Duncan. Grainne Kennedy, who's the energy engineer with Three County Energy Agency. And Grainne did a lot of work on our Green for Micro programme throughout the last number of months, so welcome, Grainne. Margaret Murphy, who's the Regional Resource Efficiency Officer with the Southern Region Waste Management Office, which is based in Limerick. So thanks for joining us today, Margaret. I can't see Margaret, but maybe you can see, but you might put up your hand there and let people know who you are there as I'm introducing you. And then Michael Doran, welcome Michael. Michael again has done a lot of work with us on our South East Green for Micro programme. Michael's the EU project manager with the Three County Energies Agency. So welcome to our speakers. Suppose just a few housekeeping rules for today. We are recording this morning's event, so if you don't wish to be included in the recording, you might switch off your camera. I think just for the conference today, if people, as many people as possible, could leave their cameras on unless they just don't want to be recorded. It's just nice to see faces when we're on a conference. It gives us a more personal feel, I think. As the speakers start, then I would also like to ask you to mute your microphones. And also, if you have any questions, I'd like to ask you just to put them into the chat box as we go along for the Q&A session. And we will also take questions at the end during the Q&A session. But if you have a question and you want to direct it to one of the speakers in particular, if you can put the speaker's name in prior to putting in the question, that would be great, so that I'll be able to direct the question accordingly. And I suppose just to note that all our slides that you'll see today, we'll make them available to you at the end of the conference. We will email it out to all of you. So very, very welcome. I'm going to get started on the conference. And before we get started, I'd like to pay a personal note and thanks to Aileen McGrath, our Senior Enterprise Development Officer here in the local enterprise office here in Kilkenny, and who has worked tirelessly for the last number of weeks trying to organise a conference. It's no mean feat to organise a conference like today. So thank you very much, Aileen, and also her colleagues in the other local enterprise offices. So I suppose the aim of this conference today is to support small businesses in the South East and break down the environmental and sustainability challenges for your business. The conference offers a unique opportunity to hear from our keynote speaker, Duncan Stewart, who will share his insights on how vital it is for businesses to address environmental issues within their business and how this will ensure the sustainability of small enterprises into the future. Our expert speakers from Three County Energy Agency and the Southern Region Waste Management Office will also share useful tips on how to make simple changes. For example, how to manage waste in your business and how to access funding support for greener practices. The panel of speakers will demonstrate how investing time and resources in green issues will ultimately benefit small businesses. And I suppose it's the local enterprise office's priority to enable our local businesses in the South East to get started on their sustainability journey. Our objective is to promote our Green for Micro program and assist businesses to prepare for the low carbon and more resource efficient economy of the future. I'll talk later about our Green for Micro program, but I'm going to get moving now on the conference. And before we start the conference, we're going to run a number of polls. We just want to get a feel for the various issues which businesses are encountering. So Mari's going to put up the first poll there as I talk through it. So poll number 1, you will see that we have a question. In your view, what aspect of your business has the most environmental impact? What impacts on your business the most? Is it transport? Is it the impact of power used in your business? Is it non-recyclable waste generated by your business, or the use of water? So I see people are on the ball there. You're putting in your answers. So we have, we're going to give it maybe a few more seconds. So if you can tick which is most appropriate to your business, which impacts you the most: transport, power, waste, or water. Okay, we'll give it another minute or two. We're up to 68% participation. So if people can put in their answers. Okay, look, I think that's probably as much as we're going to get. Okay, so just looking at the results from that question, we have 48% saying that transport has a major impact on their business. We have power. Yeah, well, that's the general consensus when we're actually rolling out our Green for Micro program. Power is a big demand for our businesses. Non-recyclable waste at 19%, and water then at 15%. So the highest impact then is power, followed by transport. Great. Okay, lovely. We'll stop sharing that now, and we might just do one other poll before we get started, because I know the speakers will align their speeches and talk and the issues that they look at to these polls. So the second question that we're going to ask you today then is, what do you see as the biggest environmental or green challenge for your business in the next 2 years? So the first answer is the cost of investing in change to support the sustainability of your business, increasing input costs of materials, sourcing inputs and stock for your business, knowledge of the green challenges ahead, and insufficient support infrastructure to assist you to meet the green goals of your business. So you can start ticking there which is most appropriate to your business. This will be an interesting result. So at the moment, we're looking at the cost of investing in change really high at 73% there at the moment. We'll give you another few seconds there just to complete that poll. Okay. Pretty much, I think, as I would have expected from speaking to businesses. Okay, if everybody feels that they have had enough time to complete that survey, the results from that is, as I would have expected, the cost of investing in change to support the sustainability of the business. And we will be addressing that later on. Michael will be talking about the various financial supports that will be available. So we will address that. The next highest was insufficient support infrastructure to assist and meet the green goals of your business. Again, I hope we'll be able to address and answer some of those questions for you today in terms of the support infrastructure to assist you. And coming in third there was the increasing input costs for materials. I'm surprised that wasn't actually higher given the issues we have in the economy today. And then followed by the knowledge of the green challenges ahead. And again, that's where we as local enterprise offices can assist you with our actual Green for Micro program that we have available. It's a 2 days mentoring, which is available to businesses. And the final one was sourcing inputs and stock for your business. So look, thanks for participating in that. That gives us a little bit of a feel of how to direct the conference going forward today. So thanks very much for that. So let's get going, because I know you're all waiting to hear Duncan. It's great to have you here, Duncan, in Kilkenny today. Thank you very much for joining us. We might just take down the poll now off of the screen, and we'll get moving on it. So Duncan is an award-winning architect and media producer, one of Ireland's most well-known and respected environmentalists, with an activism stretching back to 1969 and his student days at UCD, Duncan, where he studied architecture. He's producer and presenter of the highly acclaimed EcoEye, Ireland's longest running environmental television series. So Duncan, we're handing over to you now. We really look forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'll give you a nod at 10 minutes and 5 minutes, Duncan.
Thank you, Fiona, and really kind comments there. I appreciate it. I don't think I deserve them, but thank you. And it was really nice to hear those polls, because, you know, they hit the nerve of a lot of the issues that small businesses have. And, you know, I think even the weighting of marks there reflects the concerns of small businesses. And I'm very aware of these issues. And I know the whole team here that's on the panel here, you know, all understand these issues very well and know the challenges that you face. But if I start with what is the challenge, and I have to take it, you know, I think we all understand that climate change is the greatest existential challenge that human civilization has ever had to face. And we're now, you know, we look at the situation where we've reached, we're now at 415 parts per million in CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. And it put that in context, you know, over the last 800,000 years, it ranged between 180 parts per million and 280 parts per million in the atmosphere between glacial, interglacial periods. And now we're 50% above the highest it has been in that 800,000 years, all caused by humans, mainly by fossil fuels. And when we look at the impacts coming down the track from climate change, we really have to focus on what is it going to be like in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time, and especially for our younger generation throughout this century. You know, our kids will possibly live into the 22nd century. And the reality is that we're on a trajectory for this climate to collapse in terms of all systems. We're going to face massive disruptions unless we make the big changes that are required. And, you know, when we look at the problem globally, when we look at for example, we've COP26 coming up now in November. That's going to set the scene in terms of how serious world nations are about dealing with this. I'm not optimistic about it, by the way, what's going to happen in COP26. The way things went sadly wrong in previous ones, where commitments were not made or very superficial commitments were made. And in those times, over those years, our emissions kept climbing. And I think we have to realize that we're on a trajectory now of between 3 degrees and 4 degrees rise in global mean surface temperature. The reality of holding to a 1.5 degree is very, very remote unless the drastic changes that are required in this between now and 2030. So it's all about making the serious changes now. We're coming in very late. And if we put in the context, Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions are 1.5 times the European average per person. So we're way out of line. We're laggards of Europe when it comes to burning fossil fuel and agriculture and cement use. We're way above the European average. And the challenge there, you know, Europe have set now a target of a reduction of 55% in all greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 levels to 2030. And Europe's emissions went down by 25% since 1990, where Ireland's emissions went up by between 10 and 13% overall. And our transport emissions, I'm going to shock you, our transport emissions went up by a shocking figure. And before I say it, just think what would be a shocking figure. If our overall emissions went up by between 10 and 13%, what would shock you? Well, transport emissions went up by 153%. That's 2.5 times what they were in 1990. So when we look at the challenge ahead, transport is our biggest issue. I can see there from the polls that power from a business perspective, because the consumption of power in business obviously it's possibly higher than in transport. When you take the whole supply chain in transport into account, it's not just your own emission, your own situation, but the whole supply, the import of products, the issues of export transport emissions, the transport on land of supply chains coming to business, etc. And then staff and consumers, coming to participating in all of this. The transport then rises dramatically. And we have to even add to that is the embodied carbon that goes into the manufacture of vehicles. When you buy a car, the average car, which is 1.5 tons now, cars are getting bigger, but the average car emits in its manufacture over 17 tons of CO2. Cars range between about 6 tons for small, light cars with small engines to 35 tons for a large Jeep SUV. And I think we need to understand that when we buy a car or any vehicle or a truck or a van, we've already locked in. It's not just that we've created those emissions at the start when we buy that vehicle, but we're also then locking in maybe 15 years of a life of that vehicle. And the average car will emit, on average, for the average distance by the average driver, roughly about 4 tons of CO2 per year. So over its life, it emits about 60 tons of CO2. And I think we need to add these things when we're thinking of transport, that it's the decisions we make. If we buy an oil boiler, we're locking in 20 years of emissions. Think of it in your home. That could be, in the order of 4 or 5 tons of CO2 locked in for 20 years. That's an awful lot of CO2 and an awful lot of cost if you put in the context of a home. Typically the average house would spend on oil heating about 2,000 euros. So over 20 years, that's 40,000 euros gone up in smoke up the chimney. We need to think in the context of these incredible inefficiencies when we're burning fuel, and the fact that there are really good renewable alternatives out there. So when I look at this challenge and we divide it into transport, heat, and power into these 3 sectors, I think I've gone through some of the issues for transport there, and it's diesel primarily is the problem with petrol, but we have to realize that the problem of our greenhouse gas emissions and why Ireland's emissions went up so much, partly it's because we've sprawled out in the country. So we're living in low density situations, very, very much quite a lot of people living in one-off houses in the country, which unfortunately rely on a car for transport. And the same with small businesses, and having to get supplies of materials, there's transport issues. So we need to kind of understand that we have to find ways of either reducing dramatically the use of these fuels or switching to renewable alternatives, which obviously can be done with cars, for electric vehicles, etc. That will reduce the average car's emissions down to 1/3 of what it was in terms of the operation energy by driving those cars. But when it comes to heavy trucks and buses, we need to look at biogas or other fuels such as that, which can be produced by the local farmers. So I'll come back to the issue of the importance of collaborating, because to me, right across what we're talking about here is going to call for really a huge amount of collaboration between businesses at a local level and between farmers and consumers and communities. In other words, the success is going to come out of how we collaborate together, how we help each other within, how we can trade with each other, how we can encourage renewable energy in areas. And we see that, by the way, with the sustainable energy communities. That's a really important initiative for communities and householders. And it would be good to see that applying into small businesses taking on that model and seeing how the economy of scale and the access to expertise and, you know, resources and know-how that can result out of collaborating like that. So I'm kind of putting these things in context, because transport may not be the highest figure at the moment in your business, but in the wider context, it is the bigger. It's the biggest of all of those in terms of CO2 emissions, you know, after agriculture in Ireland. And it's way, way above the European average, our transport emissions. So now if we move to power generation, well, funny enough, power at least is going the right direction. And the efficiencies in use of power, like we can see what's happened with lighting over recent years, moving to LED and the difference that has made. And I think everybody is probably switched to LED lighting. But if you think in terms of power in our uses in such diverse range of small businesses, from small manufacture to retail to hospitality to, you know, general office or consultancy offices, or there's such a wide range. And we need to think in terms of the fact that over 50% of people working in Ireland are working in these small businesses. And that also includes farmers, you know, they're small businesses. And I kind of feel that when it comes to power, there's a range of different situations, because obviously if you're in production, you're going to have an awful lot of use of power. So in other words, it depends on the business, but at least there are good solutions out there now with wind energy. Like, wind energy is our lifeline when it comes to renewables. We're now getting 35% of all of our electricity from renewables, and over 30% of that is from wind energy. So it's really important that we foster more wind, because we've got very, very good wind regimes in Ireland. And the more companies that can come together, even build their own wind farms, work with the local communities in community-owned wind farms, owned by the small businesses in a small community, and the householders together. So I kind of feel there's really big advantages there. Obviously, another area is going to be biogas, you know, working with farmers to produce biogas, where farmers would get a good price for their grass to go into an anaerobic digestion plant, which there could be one in every village, every town in the southeast of Ireland, operating biogas filling stations, you know, biogas production, first of all, into biomethane, upgrading it to biomethane, and producing a transport fuel. All the buses in Stockholm, for example, run on biomethane. And across Europe, it's a very, very big growing area for heating and for power use in power also. But I'm just saying that we need to diversify how we can produce renewables, because to replace from diesel, and the amount of diesel that we consume in Ireland, is going to be really difficult. And it's one of our biggest challenges, is trying to find ways to make it more efficient how we use that diesel, say, for example, through heat pumps, you know, etc. But if we look at power, I think at least we're going in the right direction, in that we're decarbonizing electricity at the moment. Even though our electricity in Ireland is still very, very carbon intensive when we compare it to, say, Sweden or Norway or countries like that, where their decarbon intensity of their electricity would be like 1/10 of ours, because they're practically zero carbon in their electricity, because it's practically all coming from renewables, or some might be coming from nuclear power, but that's not really where the trend is going. It's all about renewables now. So if we look at what can we do in power use in our businesses, well, obviously the two areas are efficient use of that power. And then the second is, what can we do to switch more to renewables, whether it's solar on our roofs, or whether it's wind farms, or whether it's biogas or other uses like that. And if we move then to heat, and that probably is my area of because of my architectural background, and that's in fact why I went into doing television programs 30 years ago, was because I felt there was a huge need for people to understand in their homes the importance of energy efficiency in our homes, and creating a high performance in energy in our homes, and the whole idea of highly insulating our buildings and making them airtight, and using heat recovery ventilation systems, etc. That there's all these technologies now are out there and mainstreamed, and we have a target, as you know, to retrofit 500,000 houses between now and 2030. And that's a big commitment. And the same commitment should be there for businesses, within all of businesses in terms of their buildings. An awful lot of the heat load goes into heating buildings. Some goes into cooling buildings in the summer. Some goes into cooling because of the amount of heat generated by the business activity, and if it's a production activity. And obviously the cooling, that cooling that's needed, that can be then used. A heat pump can actually take that, cool those areas that's needed, and then use that energy for their hot water needs or for their space heating needs. So there's really big benefits of heat pumps in this area. So in other words, probably the biggest immediate solution for most businesses would be to use the use of a heat pump, to supply their energy. And a heat pump, it's not zero carbon, but if you design the installation for the heat pump correctly to suit the heat pump, then you should get about 4 kilowatts of electricity, 4 kilowatts of heat for every kilowatt hour of electricity that you supply that with. In other words, that 4 times the conversion rate. Basically, that's based on absorbing an ambient source of heat, such as air or groundwater. They're the two normal sources, but it could also be a river, in taking the excess heat out of rivers. That's now a major problem as global warming heats up our rivers. Remember, Ireland has already heated up by over 1.5 degrees on land than it was. The overall global mean surface temperature increase is 1.2 degrees, but on land it averages at about 1.6, 1.7 globally on land, whereas it's lagging behind in oceans because of the massive capacity of oceans in terms of thermal capacity. So the oceans have reached 0.8 degrees of increase, but 90% of our solar energy, our trapped solar heat, goes into our oceans. It's a massive capacity to take in that heat. And the trouble is, what we're doing in the oceans is going to massively create problems for us as we move through this century, because the oceans is where the biggest forces of major impacts will come from, with hurricanes, with rising sea levels, with all sorts of issues that we're going to come from as that temperature builds up in our oceans. So it's so critically important that we do make the break away from fossil fuels in all of these areas. And heating is probably one of the areas that we can do the most with. It's hard for people to kind of get off diesel, when you're in business. And I can see the difficulties, and we do need more solutions that give people opportunities to move off diesel. And we need to put the right incentives in place so that people buy the right types of vehicles for transport or for heating systems, and penalize the mistakes, because otherwise we're just locking in more problems for ourselves if we invest into the wrong type of infrastructure. An area that's too a big concern would be the embodied carbon that goes into buildings. You know, like we're going to build another 300,000 houses, and the average house with the concrete that goes into those houses is about 30 to 40 tons of CO2. That's the amount of CO2 goes into the building, use of those materials, concrete materials and foundations, rising walls, floors, you know, wall structures, etc. And the same basic situation applies in any time you build your office or your workplace or your factory or whatever. And if you extend it, the use of concrete has a massive problem. Whereas if you were to use timber frame construction, you would massively reduce that problem, and you'd be storing carbon in the timber that was taken out of the atmosphere over the life of the growing of a tree in a forest. That CO2 that you've absorbed, that would be absorbed into the tree and into the timber, is stored in the timber. And of course, if that gets burnt, it goes back up in as CO2 in the atmosphere. Or if it decays, it does the same. It goes back up as CO2. But if you store it in a building, it's thank you, by the way, Fiona. Yeah, I'm conscious that I'm going over time here, and I should really stand back and say that, you know, for all that varied businesses around the Southeast, my main message to you is to look. A lot of those businesses have already done an audit of their energy, you know, and those businesses that have done an audit can see clearly where their problems are. They can see where their biggest amount of CO2 is being generated. They can see where they're spending an awful lot of money on energy, whether it's in transport, heat or power, or in production, or in the embodied carbon that goes into the materials. These are all the areas that need to be concerned. And in the products that businesses are making, what is the CO2 of the product? You know, if you're making a kitchen or whatever, what is the CO2 based? And that can be easily calculated. And I think once you know and you measure the amount, then it's easier then to apply what is the most strategic way of solving the problem. Where are the low-lying fruit, for example? Where are the things can be done at low cost or at no cost? Where are the ones that will give you a big increase in potential benefits and that will give you big opportunities in the marketplace to compete with other businesses? Because this issue of climate change and greenhouse gases over this decade is going to massively be the big issue for all businesses. We can see, for example, the EU, they have now set €1 trillion in investment in the European Green Deal, $1 trillion. So all benefits, any funding now coming from Europe and probably from our government will be subject to its carbon emissions. And so all in future investment will be very clearly analyzed in that regard. So it's clear that if businesses don't make the changes or are making too little changes, those businesses, in my view, will be left behind, will find it very difficult to survive. Whereas the businesses that actually embrace the changes and really make fundamental changes in their greenhouse gas emissions, they're the business that will flourish, that will grow. And we've seen that evidence all across Europe. I mean, Denmark was one of the first early adopters in making these changes. And look at the way Denmark has benefited massively from its transformation to renewable energy. And this applies all the way down to the smallest business and to farmers and to everybody, to just small business with one person or maybe just a family running a business. The same principle applies. And I do know it's harder for small businesses because they don't have often have the expertise within their company. They don't have the resources to do so. They don't have the know-how often. And so it's so important that they come together and collaborate. And that's my main point here, is that if I was to say in 10 years' time, and we were to come back here with the same businesses and all of us together, and to look back over this 10 years coming and to say, you know, which businesses that are here today on this program are now prospering and which businesses will have fallen to the wayside. And this would be a very interesting thing to do. But I'm just saying, in my view, we're coming late. We are the laggards of Europe. We have made a lot of mistakes, but we can catch up quickly and we can prosper and make huge benefits by making this transformation. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Some startling figures there, a bit frightening there at times, but I suppose it's a call to action. And you know, you're correct in saying that small businesses are too busy with running their business, and they feel they don't have the resources and the expertise that they need to just look at even the low hanging fruit that you mentioned, you know, and you know, if they do that, it will have an impact on their actual bottom line. So it's really important from a business perspective to do it. So I suppose it is a call to action today, just to stop and think. And there are supports there available. And I suppose the reason why we're here today is back in 2019, we were listening to Duncan and other people talking about you know, the low carbon economy and what businesses can be doing to address that. And we in Carlow and Tipperary, Wexford and Waterford and Kilkenny applied to Enterprise Ireland to run a pilot Green for Micro programme for the Southeast. And we were successful in gaining the funding for that. And I suppose the aim of the programme from our perspective was to assist micro enterprises in the manufacturing sector in particular, to incorporate sustainable practices into their day-to-day running of their business and to assist them with transition into that low carbon economy. And we focused on 5 key areas, which was water, energy, waste, procurement and transport management. And the programme rolled out initially we did briefing sessions in each county across the Southeast, and we recruited 10 small businesses to undergo energy audits for their business. And our next speaker was the engineer that would have carried out those audits and worked with those businesses. So Grainne Kennedy from Energy, who's the energy engineer from 3CEA, is going to just talk to you now about the outcomes from these audits and share some of the energy saving tips that those businesses would have achieved. So interesting to hear from Grainne now in relation to you know, what happened actually on the ground with this pilot, because in fact from our pilot programme, Enterprise Ireland have rolled out nationally the Green for Micro programme, which I'll talk about later. But first we'll hear from Grainne about the outcomes from the actual pilot programme and just to hear what happened on the ground. So welcome, Grainne.
Good morning, everyone. It's very good to be here and great to see so many people joining us, and lovely to hear from Duncan there, because definitely this is a challenge for everyone in society. And it was great to work with these businesses in the Southeast to see where their challenge lies. And we had 10 businesses that we worked with throughout the challenge of COVID, which was interesting. Very different businesses, but all of a similar size and all, you know, similar challenges when it comes to accessing information and, you know, making this a priority. But fair play to the 10 businesses that we work with. They saw, you know, that energy and that carbon emissions and all of these different things were going to have an impact on their business, be it from the point of view of a cost or from the point of view of, you know, how attractive their business would be or how they'd be able to supply going up the chain. So there were very different businesses. We had some food businesses, we had some steel manufacturing, tool making, different things like that. And I just going to distill some of the learnings that we came from, we got from those 10 businesses. So the first key thing was, you know, businesses weren't used to looking at, say, the likes of energy costs or sorry, I'll say that again. They were used to obviously, energy costs and handling all those different things, but of analyzing that over a period of a year. So why is it that this particular period of time we were consuming more? Why is it when we're a company that is operating mostly, during the day, are we getting these nighttime units? Why, in this example on the top, why are we getting charged for excess wattless units? So that's it's particular for companies who might have a lot of motors. And you can speak with your energy provider and arrange a correction for this. So, there was some companies that we're working with had, been getting discharged for years and years and years. And it was just kind of seen as something that they had to pay. And of course they do have to pay it until it's corrected, but it is something that can be corrected. So, what are your kind of penalties and extra charges that you see? And this is where it's really important to kind of even speak with your accountancy people or your admin people or whoever manages your office, so that they understand what the challenges are when it comes to monitoring. So that was really interesting. It was good for us to be able to give our companies that we worked with our breakdown of where their energy was being used. So, you're this type of company, you're looking at this amount for refrigeration, you're looking at this percentage for lighting, and so on and so forth. And therefore then businesses then, or transport, whatever it is, businesses then could focus their energy on those big consumers. And that was really, really useful for us. So yeah, definitely monitoring the data is really good. And, there's never been a better time between the Green for Micro program. There's, with 3CA, we're going to have a program for auditing for in particular sectors. And then there's also support from SEI. So there really is no better time to get in there and have your business assessed for all the different environmental aspects that your business can be improved upon. And it's a great, often businesses can see this, it's another thing maybe for them to do, but it's also something that can really get your staff motivated. There's research out there that recent graduates would take a pay cut, to be able to work with a more sustainable company. And that's a huge thing that people would do. So to be able to incorporate energy efficiency and all these different things as part of who you are as a company, and also, it results in cost savings, and it motivates your staff. So it's a great thing to be able to get an energy audit at the moment under any of these schemes, and get started with your staff, and maybe then talk to them about the different technologies that you have that might be, kind of a source of energy wastage. So, we looked at many companies where compressed air was a large amount of their energy use. And, of course, it's needed for the products that are being made. But, are there leaks being checked for? Are people maintaining the equipment properly? Do they even know? Does your staff even know that the compressed air is a huge use of energy for some companies? So even getting started on talking about these issues is a really useful thing with your teams. And then there were some companies that we came across where the equipment that they had already had could be programmed for energy efficiency. So when you're speaking with your suppliers of equipment, maybe ask the question around energy and what can be done with this particular equipment to make sure that we are not wasting energy. And that was a really useful thing for some of the companies that we worked with. Maintenance and good practice like that is key, particularly when we're looking at systems like refrigeration and, as I mentioned, compressed air. And then, with refrigeration, there were simple things that could be done to maintain the system and make sure it was working properly. So, even helping the companies to understand about overstocking, or, making sure that the air can circulate, or that, kind of keep an eye out for buildup of ice in particular areas. These are simple things, but they may, they'll help a company to feel confident, and then you can go to the people, you know, your suppliers or whoever it is, and ask those questions about energy. And as Duncan said, it was so good to see. You know, I didn't live in Ireland for a good few years, and you know, I worked on energy audits many years ago in Ireland, and LED lights and sensors, you know, they were all very new, and now they're just standard across the board. And the vast majority of businesses that we worked with, they, you know, lighting wasn't that much of a concern for them anymore, because they were going bit by bit. They were replacing the lighting. They were putting in sensors. They weren't using light where it wasn't needed. So that was a great thing to see, that many of our companies were seeing that. So one of the things we were asking people to consider is, you know, how they see like waste. So do you have waste heat? Do you have a byproduct of your process? One of the companies that we worked with, they had a byproduct, and we were able to find someone who can take that and, you know, use it in their process. So ultimately it means that the other company aren't having to source, you know, what's the word, virgin material, and they can use it in their product. And it means that the company we were working with, you know, doesn't have to handle, or doesn't have it lying around, and isn't trying to kind of solve that problem. And then of course, with the heat, you know, kind of heat recovery, and using that heat that would be waste in another part of your company. So taking a step back, looking at where you use energy, where you use heating, where you could use more, or how it could be used differently, or maybe if the heat, the waste heat could be used earlier on in the process. So these are kind of questions that came up, and it was great to be able to speak with the companies about what might be possible for them. So transport, as we mentioned, is a big issue for a lot of companies. One of the things that came up, across the board is, you know, people have great people managing their transport, but had any of those people ever received training on how to drive in an energy efficient manner? And the vast majority hadn't. A lot of companies, so that's a simple thing that could be done. A lot of companies were managing their, so say they would only deliver, you know, when they had 5 or 6 different pieces to go together. So essentially that they're not going out and coming back in. This is all very common sense, but it was very much something that the companies were like, we know that our fuel is costing us a lot of money. It's also costing time for our staff. We want to make sure that we're getting the most out of it. And then, of course, the conversation always came back to electric as well. And there are a number of electric vans available at the moment, and there are financial supports there. And it definitely is going to become more and more important as the years go on. And there is a large amount of infrastructure going to be put in place for charging. And then, of course, people can use, can charge at their own business as well. So one of the last things that we looked at was around suppliers, and also for the policy of the company itself. So a good number of the companies that we worked with, they did require that their suppliers have in place an environmental policy or meet a certain standard. So that's something that had become quite common in their industry, and that was good to see. But not all companies had thought about how you know, how their suppliers might see their environmental credentials as being a positive thing. So I definitely encouraged our businesses to look at have an environmental policy for their own business. So that's something that you would share with your wider company, and it's basically setting out that, you know, in the next few years we plan to we're working towards, you know, reducing our energy consumption by this amount. We want to, you know, kind of, there was some companies that we worked with, they're, you know, developing different ways to manage, you know, that people can be more sustainable when they use those products. So they're all things that could be incorporated into environmental policy, and it kind of keeps a business working towards being more sustainable. And that's something that businesses can definitely market. to the people who are buying their products. So it's a very good thing. Many of the companies that we worked with were unaware that, that there's funding streams available, through the Better Energy Community Scheme that 3CA coordinated in the Southeast, and that there's also a tax incentive scheme through the Accelerated Capital Allowance scheme. So these are definitely things that businesses should be aware of, and if they can take advantage of them. And I can actually put the links to both of those schemes in the chat. And that's it really. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end. So I will stop sharing there now.
Thank you very much, Grainne. Thanks for that. And I suppose I just want to again thank Grainne for her work on our Southeast Green for Micro programme. I think the 10 businesses that participated had huge learnings and from the programme, and hopefully they are going to benefit from that. And I suppose there is a popular quote in management circles that says, what gets measured gets managed. Now, there is a lot of debate about that, whether that is correct, but I think in terms of businesses looking to transition to a low carbon economy and looking at, the key areas of water, energy, waste, procurement and transport, that really we need to start measuring, and in order for it to have an impact on our bottom line, I think it's just really, really important. So it's a call to action today, just to start looking and start monitoring and start measuring. So thank you, Grainne. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker will talk about how to manage waste in your business, tools and resources. And I would like to welcome Margaret Murphy. Margaret, we've worked with over the years. Margaret's the Resource Efficiency Officer with the Southern and Waste Regional Office. And the Southern and Waste Regional Office comprises of 10 local authority areas of Carlow, Clare, Cork County, Cork City, Limerick City and County, Kerry, Kilkenny, Tipperary, Waterford City and County and Wexford. And I suppose their role is to facilitate and service the Regional Waste Steering Committee in the implementation of the objectives set out in the Southern Regional Waste Management Plan 2015 to 2021 to develop a prioritised programme of objectives and targets and key performance indicators to ensure that the aims of the plan are delivered. As was their role is to assist and facilitate and coordinate in partnership with the member local authorities the implementation of those objectives. So delighted to welcome Margaret today. Margaret is based in Limerick, so very welcome. So I'll hand it over to you, Margaret.
No. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you very much for that introduction. That's great. And it saves me having to explain also who we are in the Southern Region Waste Management Office. So wonderful. Now, yes, I'm with the Regional Waste Office. My own role is Resource Efficiency Officer, and I'm there for businesses and organizations to help in avoiding waste, reducing waste, and maybe saving money in the process as well. We operate, I'll just give a little brief overview in terms of what we operate to in our waste management plan. We've got this waste hierarchy. It's come from Europe, and prevention there you can see is first and foremost, and that includes reuse. And if it can't be prevented or reused, i.e. it's not waste at all in the first place, maybe materials can be re-prepared for reuse, and then there's recycling, recovery, for example, energy recovery, and last is disposal. So that's the aim we have, go for prevention first. Another recent term, and many of you are all, I'm sure, familiar with it, but just to refer to it, the circular economy. It's the approach that we shouldn't really be calling used materials wastes, but actually there's still resources that can come back into the economy because they've got value, in other words. So they're the two main aims on which our plan is based. And in fact, from next year, there are 3 regional waste plans. We're going to become a national waste management plan for a circular economy, so it'll even be emphasized more. the approach of the circular economy. Now that's it in a nutshell, what we do and where we're coming from. For individual businesses, if you want to improve anything, and Fiona talked about measuring it to manage it, first of all, you need to know how much waste your business generates. It's a good starting point. It's a good baseline to see where you can improve and save money again is the possibility. These are simple pointers, and I know a lot of the businesses are already well on the way and achieving great successes, but this is just the general format. As Grainne said about the energy bills, if you ask your waste contractor to explain your waste bills to you, if you gather so many over the past 6 months or whatever, see where hopefully they would supply weights of the different like recyclables and the mixed waste and the food waste, so that you know how much, and also how much weight and how much it costs, and it's a good starting point. After that, you look within your business, where are the main sources? Now, it could be a very extensive audit for larger companies, but indeed a walkthrough audit, looking in the bins, looking in your processing area, food preparation will tell a lot regarding what waste is generated. So the main sources, that's where you'd focus first, and not to expect to achieve everything in the one go. It's all about incremental changes, and I suppose the Pareto principle, where 80%, the 80-20 rule, where 80% is the source or the reason, focus on that first and then get to the small stuff. Always, and we all need encouragement, whether owner, manager or staff. It's great to see what improvements have been achieved and work from there. It gives encouragement. It's great to broadcast it to the staff and indeed to your customers as well, how you are performing and what improvements you've made, because everyone likes to hear the good news. I think packaging is a good place to start in terms of reducing waste, because no matter what your organization, you're going to have packaging in your purchases and in your products, maybe if you are packaging your products. So we end up with what's called backdoor packaging. The supplies that what we purchase ends up, you discard, be it cardboard, shrink wrap, and other types like maybe not so easy to recycle materials like the expanded polystyrene foam. So talk to your suppliers, see if they could use reusable containers, especially in the supply of vegetables and such like, and hence there could be a reuse loop set, so you wouldn't end up with packaging on your premises. But having said that, if there is packaging rising, maybe you can put it to good use in your own storage, or I think if your customer will appreciate it too, that you're doing your bit for the environment if you're reusing incoming packaging on supply of product. Also within your operation, we all have to have cleaning systems and cleaning schedules. So to use dispensers and bulk buy, it'll save you money as well, rather than buying a lot of smaller units with a lot of packaging on the individual units. So it's just these pointers, and not forgetting also that the product that you manufacture and send out to your customers, can you be more efficient in your packaging? The other area that's common, well, certainly is common to all the hospitality and catering industries, but any business, you're going to maybe have your own canteen and your own food waste arising. So it's scaling it according to your needs, but certainly if you are in the hospitality catering, stock rotation so that nothing goes out of date. And when you're serving any type of menu, and you have to stock the goods if you have it on your menu choice, but maybe it's not such a popular choice and you end up having to discard the food as waste. And also, I know I have the example up in the corner there of the plate with a lot of leftover. We've all experienced it. You get too much to eat and you just can't finish your plate, and that gets discarded as waste. So it's no harm to look at portion control. It's not being mean, it's being realistic as to what people can eat when you're serving. Traditionally, I think maybe we thought large platefuls were a great sign of a service, but not anymore. It's to do with avoiding waste. And any materials we can, and we have to comply with safety regulations, of course, food safety, but it can be stored and applied in maybe a clever menu the next day for food that's left over from one day. And if all comes to all, there are charities that take food surplus, perfectly good food. So these are all ways of avoiding it going in the food waste bin. So that's the comment to everyone. There are other, depending on your own organization and business, and you will know it, and you'll be doing plenty already. If you're in any production process, producing timber panels or steel bars or whatever, there can it be optimized so that you have less waste? Is the maintenance program sufficient to avoid rejects at the start and stop times and so on? So it's down to each process to keep it well tuned. In the office, we've waste as well. We print maybe traditionally unnecessary drafts, whereas now email is great. You can circulate it. You don't have to print it automatically. One can review it, but even if you do print it, go double-sided. You can set hopefully your printer to double-sided printing. There are little simple examples. I know in these, I talked there about single-use disposable items and single-use plastics. It's not easy during this pandemic time to avoid packaging around individual items, because we are all conscious of avoiding the transmission of the virus. But in normal times, the idea is to avoid single-use disposable items. And I have in particular there the diagram for single-use plastics. From July this year, there are particular items of single-use plastics banned from the market. I hope everyone is seeing, it's usually like bamboo spoons, cutlery now instead of plastic cutlery. And there shouldn't be plastic plates and such like. Straws, of course, is a common one. And I know the likes of the fast food chains would be making attempts to have some alternatives, or at the very least, to let the customer ask for a straw rather than automatically supplying straws. And of course, there are exemptions like medical needs for use of these straws and other items. But it's a great start, banning these items. And actually the focus of that was to avoid marine litter. The EU directive, they picked the most common items that end up in our oceans. And they also are focusing on other things further, like cigarette butts and plastic bottles. There are other measures to be implemented as well. So it's a great start. Rechargeable batteries, you do have waste paper maybe, but have it as packaging if you have a product that requires filler. The bottom one there, tap water, again, because of the COVID, it may not be the most desirable. I know where I went into a regular restaurant there for lunch, they'd always have a jug and glasses of water, but they didn't have them this time. And you know, that's life at the moment. But these are just examples of what can be achieved. I have talked a lot about waste prevention and reducing waste. And indeed, recycling does have a large part to play. And I know the poll there referred to non-recyclability. There was about 20% felt that was the highest impact. It certainly is an issue. And I think there's focus on the likes of repack and packaging producers that they must try and produce packaging that's more recyclable. There are certain composite type of packaging where there's metal and foil and other materials, and really that makes it difficult. So this is another reason to talk to your supplier, to ask them to supply the goods at the very least in recyclable packaging if it can't be reusable goods packaging. I want to focus now for these last couple of slides on a new waste toolkit promoting good waste management practice. And I suppose a big focus is on separating the waste for recycling, because it was found in an an EPA survey in the past couple of years found that in commercial bins, 70% of what was going into the bin could actually either have gone into the recycling bin, the mixed recycling, or else into the food waste. So there was great scope there to improve your environmental performance and maybe reduce your waste disposal costs as well. So these are just a couple of the resources in this toolkit online, and it's mywaste.ie/business. There's a nice guide, and we've another supplementary support and checklists to help businesses on their way and for continuous improvement. For training of owner managers and staff, there's a nice set of 4 videos, animations. They're light-hearted enough in presenting how to recycle, whether it's your mixed recyclables, food waste, special wastes, and there's also a general guide as well. So I have another slide just showing the resources that are available on the website. There are posters that can be put over bins. They also can be stuck onto bins for that matter, because you can either download them on the website or you can order for free more durable versions that have adhesive backing. So they're ready-made, ready to use. And these labels provide a nice uniformity. I think they encourage us all. If you have a nice system for your waste segregation and nicely labeled and same applied across the bins, it encourages people more, I think, to actually recycle. We also have produced a whole range of like cardboard labels, glass, and so on. So there's quite a list on the website, which you can, as I say, download or order, and it'll be distributed in a week or two to you. So that's it. We're a big plug there for mywaste.ie/business. The website was produced by, well, there's mywaste.ie is a general information website. The 3 regional waste management offices are behind it. And we've worked also in particular now for business in this section of the website. And it is funded by the Government of Ireland. So we appreciate that funding and we encourage everyone to go there. So thank you. Any questions, I'd be happy to take.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thanks. So there's a huge amount of resources there to assist you both personally and within your business to look at reducing your waste. And I suppose, simple ways to reduce waste, not rocket science, just to really think about what you're doing in terms of your waste. So thank you very much there, Margaret. I suppose just to get back again to our key message for this morning, and basically is that, there is help at hand to support businesses on their green journey. And hopefully we've got you thinking about that today. And the key resource to the local enterprise office is our Green for Micro program. And this program provides up to 2 days advice or technical support with one of our green mentors. And it's totally free of charge to businesses that apply. It can include an assessment of where you are now in terms of your green efficiencies, and it'll provide recommendations on specific changes that the business can implement. So that resource is available on your local enterprise office website, or if you go onto localenterprise.ie, you'll be able to find your local website, whether it's Carlow, Kilkenny, wherever you're located, and contact your local enterprise office business advisor and have a chat about that. There are also other supports that our next speaker now is going to outline, Michael Doran, who's the EU project manager with 3CEA, and Michael's going to provide you with details of some of the schemes and supports that may be suitable for your business. And once again, before Michael starts, I'd like to ask you, if you have questions, put them in the chat box. We will have the opportunity for a Q&A if you want to ask questions as well at the end. But in the meantime, again, direct any questions you have through the chat box. Thanks very much and welcome, Michael.
Fiona, thank you very much. Before I start, I just want to thank particularly 3 people. Fiona, I think, put together this Green for Micro program, and that has now been extended across Ireland. So it was the local enterprise office in Kilkenny that kicked this off. So a lot of credit goes to Fiona to have the vision to do this. Aileen has been the support person and has driven the project over the last 8 or 9 months. I also want to thank Grainne from within 3CEA for actually doing the work for us. And I think she's done a very good job. Aileen warned me before I was speaking not to go off piste. But when she said that, she smiled, because she knew full well that I was going to go off-piste. So I shall start going off-piste in the beginning, and then I shall talk about what I'm supposed to be talking about later on. I retired 3 years ago, and then about 18 months ago, I was talking to Paddy Phelan, who's the chief executive for 3CEA, and Paddy asked me if I'd be interested in joining 3CEA out of retirement. When I looked at the work that they were doing, I decided that it was worth doing because, in my opinion, 3CEA make a difference. And that's what I want to do, is to make a difference. There are some days when I come to work and you think, I might be better off just sitting in my sun lounger beside the swimming pool and not actually doing anything. And then days when I hear people like Duncan speak, I've known Duncan for about 20 years, I just find him inspiring. And I then realize why I went back to work, because I think we all should make a difference. When you hear somebody like Duncan speak, you get inspired and you want to make a difference. And it reminds me of something I heard Mary Robinson say in a sustainability seminar about a year ago. And she was saying, with regards to climate change, do 3 things. The first one is do anything. So however small it is, whether you cycle instead of drive the car, or you don't eat meat 1 day a week, or whatever you do something. The second one, which I found really interesting, is get angry, which is challenge the press, challenge the media, challenge your local authority if they're not doing what you want them to do. If you're talking to somebody and somebody says, climate change, I don't give a toss, challenge them and say you should give a toss for all of the reasons that Duncan spoke about this morning. And the third one is be creative. So instead of sitting around going, oh, woe is me, we're all going to die, look for ways where you can make a difference and be creative about it. So Aileen will now be happy to find that I've now gone back on piste, and I will now talk about what I'm supposed to be talking about, which is funding opportunities. So I'm going to talk about particularly funding opportunities for small businesses. I'll talk about support schemes and grants. I'm not going to talk about the communities programme. Grainne has already mentioned this. It's the Better Energy Communities. That is not completely appropriate for small businesses, but it is there. There's another thing called the Project Assistance Grant, but it's only available for businesses who have an energy cost in excess of €50,000 a year. So that doesn't affect most people or apply to most people on this seminar. And then there's also European Investment Bank, but again, they're at the multi-million-pound investment, which is probably not suitable for small businesses. First one, SEAI audits. Already, Grainne has spoken about what we were doing within the Green for Micro. So an audit is a good place to start because it tells you where your business is. Within the SEAI audit scheme, which was launched 3 months ago, you can get up to €2,000 to cover the cost of an energy audit. If your energy audit costs more than that, then you put the €2,000 voucher towards it. To apply to be eligible for it, you have to be what's called a non-obligated entity. And those are businesses which are defined under the Energy Efficiency Directive. They're basically big energy consumers. Most SMEs will not fall into that. You have to be tax compliant, you have to be registered as a business, and you have to spend at least $10,000 a year on energy. So that's the SEAI audit scheme. I'm now going to give a plug for 3CEA. This is a project that we're involved in. As Fiona said at the beginning, I am the European Project Manager for 3CEA, and one of the projects that we have got is called CanCap, and that's what you're looking at on the screen now. CanCap has, to a large extent, flowed out of Green for Micro. As we were doing the work for Fiona and Aileen, we realized that there is a requirement, there is a need in the Southeast to look at energy auditing for small businesses. So we became involved in a European project called CanCap. And we're now delivering 150 audits in the Southeast. They're energy audits, and we'll be delivering those over the next 28 or 30 months. Similar to Green for Micro. Now, Green for Micro was for micro businesses. CanCap is for SMEs, so slightly larger businesses. But one of the important things is, if you look down the little list on the left, we do energy auditing and a metering plan, and then an energy management system. But the little blue one down the bottom, support for management into the national plan. One of the things that Grainne has already spoken about is most, and Duncan mentioned this as well, most businesses, whether they make widgets or they make sweets or whatever they do, their main focus is not running an energy plant. So when you give them an audit, they go, thank you very much. They put the audit on the shelf, and then they go back to making the widgets and the sweets. One of the things within CanCap is a hand-holding exercise, which also happened within Green for Micro, which is that we then help them to actually make a difference and implement what we're trying to do. There's a target sector within this. There are 4 separate sectors that we've identified within the CanCap project. First one's manufacturing, which includes food producers. The second one is offices and property management. So not individual offices in a building, but office buildings. The third one is shopping centres and supermarkets. And the fourth one is nursing homes. That will be launched within the next 2 weeks. So if you are an SME, there's an opportunity here to get an audit done by 3CEA for nothing. Next one, and Grainne has already mentioned this, and it's called Accelerated Capital Allowance. So what it is, it's a tax incentive that promotes energy efficiency within your business. So if you're paying tax, you can get tax relief up to 12.5% on the expenditure that you have expended on approved renewable energy or energy efficiency measures. It's suitable for companies, sole traders, and farmers who pay corporation tax. The next thing which it also covers is cars. Now, I'll come on to commercial vehicles on a separate slide, but it also covers for SMEs. Cars are eligible up to €24,000. Next one, which is for commercial vehicles, and it's called the N1 category. Now, N1 category vehicles are typically small commercial vehicles up to 3.5 tons. Now, Duncan was talking earlier on about a typical car is about 1.5 tons now. So it'll give you an idea. It's a typical small van, sort of little white van man stuff you see driving around. There's a maximum grant of €3,500, and it's suitable for electric vehicles. N1 category is just a type of vehicle. It has to be a new vehicle. You can't get it on secondhand. Next one, I've cheated a little bit on this because I've put 2 things together on this slide, which should be complementary, but they're actually not really complementary, and I'll explain why. This slide is supposed to be about the support scheme for renewable heat. This is a scheme which was launched by SEAI 3 years ago, and it has had, I shall have to temper my language here, it has had very little effect. It has not had the effect that it should have had because of administrative difficulties in the way in which it's being delivered. Over on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a thing called 40 by 30. This is a project being developed by Renewable Energy Ireland, and it's to try and look at, it's to present a vision for a renewable heat. Now, this is to do with renewable heat, not to do with transport or other stuff, but it's renewable heat vision by 2030 that 40% of this could be coming from renewables in Ireland. This is a realistic vision. The support scheme for renewable heat should be helping that, but their support scheme for renewable heat has had virtually no impact to date because of the way which it is being delivered. And I'll give a little bit more talk about that in a minute. The scheme operates on two separate ways. One is an installation grant and the other is an ongoing operational support. And I'll just explain what the difference is. So this thing is called the SSRH, Support Scheme for Renewable Heat. You can get grant aid for air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, and water source heat pumps. And that's up to 30% of the installation cost. On a separate scheme within the same program, you can get an ongoing tariff. So this is an amount per kilowatt hour for heat, which comes either out of a biomass boiler or biomass CHP, or comes out of biogas. Now, referring back again to something that Duncan said earlier on, Ireland should be covered in anaerobic digesters. Because of a support scheme in Northern Ireland, and remember, Northern Ireland is about a third the size of Southern Ireland. Northern Ireland now has 90 operational anaerobic digesters, of which about 80 are on farm. At the moment, Ireland has, I think, 4 operational anaerobic digesters. Now, the agriculture, the landscape, north and south are similar. The only reason that it has not developed in the south of Ireland is that there hasn't been a suitable support mechanism in the south of Ireland for anaerobic digesters. I think that's criminal, because we're not using our resources in the way that we could be. And this SSRH scheme was supposed to be delivering 150 biomass installations within the first 3 years. As far as I'm aware, to date, there are 5 operational, because after they launched the scheme, they then kept adjusting the criteria that you had to get over, the barriers that you had to get through to get approval. And to date, that scheme has not been effective. And I just think it's very, very unfortunate. Right, that's the end of me. You'll be very glad to hear that I didn't take up my full allocation of time, so we're nearly back on time. But I just want to thank Fiona and Aileen again for developing the Green for Micro programme, which I think has led on to other things. And thank you all very much for listening today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Michael. There's an absolute huge amount of supports out there available. I suppose people probably find it just a little bit difficult to navigate their way around it. But I suppose what I would suggest is you contact your local enterprise office. In terms of micro enterprises, that's up to 10 employees. And again, contact the 3 counties energy agency. There's great support there, and Grainne and Michael are very helpful and will hopefully navigate you through the system. And I suppose just to reiterate again, you know, contact us at the local enterprise office. I see Aileen has put up the link there in the chat for the Green for Micro scheme, and I see Grainne has put up other links and Margaret has put up links. So we'll circulate all of those links to you after the seminar, along with the actual slides for today. So a huge amount of information there today, and I just want to thank all our speakers, Duncan, Grainne, Margaret, and Michael. It's been really, really inspirational. I suppose it makes you just stop and think about, you know, I really need to just do something now, and hopefully this will be the start of a journey for people in businesses. So before we go into a Q&A session, I suppose I just want to do one final poll in terms of where you're at in terms of taking action with on your green journey. So I might ask Mary to put up the final poll, and the question is, do you plan to take action on green goals for your business? When? Immediately? Not at the moment? Or it's something I will consider within the next 2 years? So we're just interested in to see, you know, what space people are at in terms of their journey. So I'll give you another few seconds to complete that. And people will be at different stages. I see that a lot of people are saying yes immediately, and hopefully we'll be hearing from those people in terms of trying to lever some supports, whether it's through the local enterprise office Green for Micro program, or whether it's through 3CEA for the range of supports there that Michael outlined. And 9% not at the moment, and again, everybody has their reasons and they're all on a different journey, and 39% are stating that it's something that they will consider within the next 2 years. So that's great. Majority of people looking to start on their green journey. So I think we'll close that poll now, and we will move on. As I promised you, we'd be out of here by 11:15. So we're going to move on to our Q&A section, and we have a few questions in the chat box, and I'm going to start with those. But if you'd like to actually physically ask a question and we get a little bit of engagement with the businesses and people here on the conference, just put your hand up and I'll go to you. So I'll just start off with the questions first. There was a question there for you, Duncan. Can you tell us where we can get information on CO2 levels in building materials? Is there a site we can visit? And I do note that somebody, Ralph, responded to Michael on that, but we'll ask Duncan to respond to that maybe.
Yes, CO2 in materials in buildings, it's a very important area. I think I referred to there roughly between 30 and 40 tons for the average house goes in as basically that's the CO2 generated by the manufacture of concrete in our buildings that goes into our houses. And you know, if you're looking for where to get the figures, they're not really available at the moment. Unfortunately, there isn't really kind of a register in Ireland of our materials, because when you think about the manufactured products, you have to think of the whole life cycle of them, from the supply source, you know, the extraction of raw materials, the transport of it, the manufacture, the amount of energy that goes into the manufacture, and the CO2 emissions from that, and then into the transport to the construction site, the erection of the building, etc. And then there's the end of life issue of materials too that goes into this. But at the moment, there's about, I think the figure is 11% of our total CO2 emissions is coming from the manufacture of materials. It's the embodied carbon that is produced from that. But if you take timber compared to concrete, I'm just giving an example. Timber will have taken CO2 out of the atmosphere, sequestered it during the growing of a tree, and most of that CO2 is absorbed into producing the timber. So timber is 50% carbon. So when you use timber, you're actually storing 1.8 times the weight of the timber in CO2 that has been taken out of the atmosphere. Because when we say it's 50% carbon, but carbon is, when you convert carbon into CO2, it's 3.66 times the weight, if you like, because of the oxygen. So when you use timber, you're basically continuing the life of the tree from the point of view of locking in that carbon that was sequestered. It's like, for example, we have stored carbon in our peatlands over the last 9,000 years, and we should treasure the fact that they're stored in the peat, and we must prevent it escaping out. You know, it's the same thing with timber. Timber has taken it out of the atmosphere. Now we can store it in long-term use, like in a building structure, not in short-term uses. If it goes into paper manufacture, newsprint, it's no benefit. So a forest that produces kind of timber for paper, there's no carbon sequestration really, because at the end of the life, you clear the forest, it all goes up as CO2 in paper. So I'm just saying that there's a massive difference between, say, concrete and steel. You know, the carbon, there are many, by the way, tables on this in terms of, if you look up, there are websites on the embodied carbon internationally available. And, you know, steel is a very high carbon. To manufacture steel or aluminium, especially aluminium, incredibly in carbon intensive. Plastic also. And then concrete, because we use so much of it in our buildings. And concrete is made from limestone. And limestone is calcium carbonate. So what happens in the process, you're taking basically by heating up that material up to 1500 degrees Celsius, it takes oxygen from the atmosphere to produce CO2 that's released into the atmosphere. And then the amount of energy used, very often it's coal or fuels like that makes concrete. So concrete is like every ton of concrete produces, every ton of cement, I should say, Portland cement, produces about 0.85 tons of CO2. So about 850 kilograms of CO2. And then it depends on the mix of the concrete, the amount of aggregate you put in, the amount of sand, you know, what is that mix and the water. Now, those other materials might only contribute probably 4% of the total. It's really all in the cement. Of course, you can use GGBS cement, which would be less because it's coming from the granulated blast furnaces of the smelting industry, which obviously generates huge amounts of carbon emissions as an industry, but it's the waste product that goes into that cement. So it reduces the carbon emissions by about 40% from what it would have been. But concrete is the big one by far. So when we look at our buildings, an awful lot of it goes into the foundations. So the amount of concrete we pour into foundations and rising walls is about 40% of the total that goes into the average building. So we need to look at the foundations because that's a massive part of the problem. And there are many ways of creating foundations where the carbon emissions of that would be like 1/10 of it. The Passive House, a source of information there would be the Passive House Institute, because it has looked at, or the Green Building Council, for example, they've got figures on these sort of areas of how you can reduce the carbon in the building in terms of the use of concrete, how you can maximize the use of timber to store carbon from the atmosphere. These are all the kind of things we need to look at. But so far, we have not in Ireland at all focused on this massive problem. And it is about 11% of our total CO2 emissions. It's something we really have to look seriously at. And if we're building new buildings, we have to, before we build those buildings, do an evaluation, an audit on what is going to be the carbon emissions. And then if it looks high in certain areas, we have to redesign our buildings, redesign our foundations, relook at our walls. And an issue, by the way, I'm going away from the subject, but we now look at mica in our concrete blocks and pyrites in our aggregates that have caused massive structural problems. I'm going up, I've been asked to go up to Donegal this weekend to give environmental talks, but the people affected up in Inishowen by the mica, you know, it's a really, really serious situation. Their buildings are crumbling. I mean, it's cracks everywhere in their buildings. These are concrete blocks that have unfortunately been, the aggregate was sourced from quarries that is very much these impurities of mica or pyrites. The same in Mayo, by the way, Ballina region. And I'm just saying that those buildings, if they have to be built again, and there could be what, 30, 40, 50,000 buildings, houses that will have to be built, families moved out for a year, huge disruption. But the problem is that, you know, if they have to be rebuilt as new buildings, then think of the amount of carbon emissions if they're built again in concrete. And I believe that I've come up with a solution for basically saving these houses and making sure that this problem can be solved. And instead of just retrofitting them, in the solution, which would be maybe 1/20th of the amount of work that's required, like 5% of the work to structurally solve these houses, you could at the same time transfer them into an A1 building energy rated houses by using the grant that's now coming for the 500,000 houses for these houses, using that kind of grant aid, but making the actual performance of the building go all the way up to an A2 performance. And I'm just saying that these are sort of options we should be looking at every time we build a new building, And the same, I think, goes back to our vehicles. Every time we buy a car or a truck, we need to understand, first of all, the embodied carbon that is going to be that has gone into the manufacture of this boiler, or, for example, a car or a truck or a van, and then look at what is the overall operational CO2 over the life of that particular vehicle. If it's 15 years, for example, or if it's a boiler with a life of 20 years, what is the total carbon emissions that we're locking in to the future? These are sort of things we need to look at when it comes to materials. And that's a really good question that was asked, but unfortunately, we don't have the answer in Ireland. Nobody has done the research that I know of. I could be wrong, but I haven't found it, where you can get the figures to show the different materials. What is the carbon intensity in terms of embodied carbon that has gone into the manufacture of those? And by the way, that needs to go not just at the manufacturer. It has got to be that follow the whole supply chain, the transport, international transport, transport across Ireland, etc. in this. But sorry, I've gone off. It's a difficult question to give a direct answer to.
Thanks very much, Duncan, and Michael has thanked you there. Michael, if you want to speak, you're more than welcome to speak there. Just put up your hand. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, look, I'm a certified energy manager myself. I work with Johnson Controls, smart buildings around the world, etc., etc. So it's very interesting. Thank you, everybody. In particular, I want to thank Duncan. It was an inspirational speech, and when he spoke about building materials, I know I'll be building a new house next year myself, and I just wanted to ask that question. I think, as Duncan said, it was a very relevant question, because we're building, the government now are talking about building 300,000 homes. Well, have they thought about the carbon content of those 300,000 homes? And as Duncan said, can we do it better? So that's where I'm coming from, really. But thank you very much. I really enjoyed the talk here this morning. Found it very informative. Thank you.
Great, Michael. And I know Ralph responded to your question, Michael. Ralph, if you want to feed into the conversation there on that, or else we can just move on.
I want to refer to the website of the Irish Green Building Council, and as well there are some website from the UK where you can find some measures RICS, also RECX, and the new in Galway, the Galway University. They're working on this CO2 content of general buildings here in Ireland as well. So there are some research work is out there, but so the main information you will get from the Irish Green Building Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. And those links are up in the chat there. We have another question then in there from Madeleine. Madeleine's going to build a small unit in her garden for use as a home bakery. She would welcome recommendations for the most energy efficient, eco-friendly structure and materials. So, Duncan, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And by the way, I really appreciate those comments made there just before. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to build in your back garden this small unit, you have a great opportunity to do this at practically zero carbon in every way. And I don't know how large you're building this, but assume it's small building, maybe 100 square meters, maybe it could be up to 200, maybe, I don't know what size but But okay, by the way, it would be exempt up to 25 square meters in terms of size. It would require a planning permission above that. But in terms of the use you're putting to, the use for the exemption in your back garden of a house would only apply to it being ancillary to the house itself, you know. So a business would require, in theory, require a planning, but I'm not saying that that's an issue. But you can, the first thing to start with is in the design of the building. And I mean, first of all, by having your business in your own house means your transport now is reduced dramatically. That's the first thing. So that's a huge benefit, because now you don't have to drive a car or be dependent on a car to get to work. The second then is to make sure that the materials are constructed. And I think I've mentioned that now, the difference between concrete and timber. And Irish timber, you can produce that building with very, very low CO2 embodied carbon in it, and you're storing the carbon, the sequestered carbon from the tree in the building. They're straight away the biggest benefits that you can create by just going timber and even timber clad, and making sure the timber cladding is well protected, you know, from inclement weather in Ireland, because use of timber on the outside of buildings, we have to be more careful, much more careful with than in Europe. The next then is to build it to passive house standard. I believe all new buildings should be built to passive house standard. Anything less than passive house standard will mean retrofitting again. And retrofitting a building costs between 10 and 20 times the cost of what it would cost to do it when you're building originally. So it needs to be in the design of the building built to a passive house standard, which would mean the energy performance would be less than 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum. Compare that to a G rating. A G-rated building would be 450 kilograms, up to 1,100. Or for example, if you take an average house in Ireland at D2, it would be about, I figure now I need to look at it, but put it this way, it's about 10 times. An average house in Ireland would be about 10 times the CO2 consumption of a passive house. So if you get your roof, walls, floors, windows, all designed, built to that standard, the cost difference will be about 10% in the building costs, roughly. But it can actually be that you build it at no extra cost. The next would be to design it so that the roof is oriented. If it's a pitched roof, that you can have solar on the roof. So that you're orienting the house as much as possible, a roof slope to the south, southeast, south, southwest. And the steeper the pitch, the better from the point of view of getting the winter sun, which you're looking to maximize on. We need to think in Ireland, we're in a latitude of 53 to 55 degrees north of the equator. And at that northern latitude, the winter sun, like we're seeing it from now onwards, the sun is dipping on the sky. And over the winter, we need to understand that we're trying to maximize whatever available solar is there. A problem we've got in Ireland is that we can't depend on solar as the sole source of heating for buildings, simply because there's so little in the winter compared to the summer. But if you build to a passive house standard, there's actually no need for any heating. That's the one big advantage with a passive house. It's the amount of heat you'll use, it's nearly going to be heated by body temperature, you know? So the difference is so big, it's huge. I mean, the difference between, again, an A-rated and a G-rated would be, a G-rated house is 30 times to 70 times the energy consumption of an A-rated house to the same size and to the same level of comfort. That's the difference, 30 to 70 times worse. So that's the worst type of house, a G, of course. But I'm just saying, build it to passive house standard, and I mean a certified passive house standard. That would be my message to you.
Thanks, Duncan. I have to say, I could listen to you all day. It's not very interesting. I find it really, really inspirational. Have we any other questions there? If you want to put up your hand, We have a message there from the Chief Executive there of 3CA, Paddy Phelan. Paddy had to leave there, but he's saying the main point to note is that if one focus on one big energy or waste action over a 5 to 7 year period, you will see significant results. The key is the investment in measurement, as metering will provide you the evidence you need to support your climate action plans in every SME. So I think that's really, really important to note. And that takes us back then to the supports that are available for micro enterprises. Contact your local enterprise office, avail of the Green for Micro programme. Visit localenterprise.ie and you'll find the relevant contact numbers. Avail of the CanCap scheme that's available through 3CEA. Contact Grainne or Michael or contact anybody in 3CEA. Visit the 3CEA website and find out information on that. So I suppose that leaves me, I don't see any hands up. I don't think I'm missing anyone, am I? I don't see any hands up. So that leaves us just to wrap up, and thank you very much to all our speakers. Thanks to Duncan for a really inspirational speech. Thank you to Grainne for her update and also for working with our 10 Southeast businesses, and hopefully they're on their a new journey within their businesses. And thanks to Margaret. Margaret, hopefully you'll have made people think about how they can start today in reducing their waste. And finally, thanks to Michael for outlining the huge range of supports available. And I have to say, you know, you probably feel there's a lot there, but you have now the contacts that you need to go forward and start your journey. I suppose Green for Business, you know, it is good for business. So let's get on that journey today. And from all in the local enterprise office in the Southeast, Carlow, Kilkenny, Wexford, Waterford and Tipperary, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be in contact with you with the slides, and have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye-bye.